Imagine this. You walk in on a Monday morning, coffee in hand, and your entire production environment is gone. Not hacked, not ransomed, wiped by your own AI agent. And your backups? They're also gone. All of it wiped in just 9 seconds. This is not hypothetical. This happened. Here's ABC 7.
This morning, questions are being raised about the safety of artificial intelligence after a tech CEO claimed an AI tool wiped out all of his company's data in just 9 seconds. Jared Crane is the founder of Pocket OS, which develops software for car rental companies. He says he was using Cursor, an AI coding agent, to work on a routine task when it encountered a credential mismatch and decided, entirely on its own initiative, to fix the problem by deleting a volume. The AI had deleted Pocket OS's entire production database. The company was able to restore the data, but only to the most recent backup from 3 months ago. Crane says the company lost all car reservation data and new customer signups from that time. Crane also shared the AI agent, powered by Anthropic's Claude model, admitted its mistake when confronted. It wrote, "I didn't verify. I ran a destructive action without being asked. I didn't understand what I was doing before doing it." So far, Cursor and Anthropic have not responded to our request for comment.
No malice, no rogue intelligence, just a well-intentioned tool, misconfigured, undergoverned, and trusted with more access than it had context to use responsibly. Here's the uncomfortable truth. This isn't really a story about AI going wrong. It's a story about humans abdicating responsibility, skipping the governance, the guardrails, the recovery planning, and assuming the technology would just fill in the gaps. This is a story into what actually happened and why the real failure was human, and what every organization deploying AI agents right now needs to do before their own 9-second disaster arrives. I'm Robert Vamosi. This is Error Code.
I am Todd Thorsen. I am the Chief Information Security Officer for CrashPlan. So CrashPlan is basically critical backup and recovery and data resilience in covering off on servers, endpoints, and then critical applications.
In this episode, we're talking about a real-world incident of an AI that was responsible for production code and made a decision that it probably shouldn't have.
Yeah, so this happened to, it was a small SaaS company. I think they were, so if I'm not mistaken, supporting rental car agencies and that data OS platform that they develop. And what it sounds like is they were doing some agentic work using Cursor AI sitting on top of a Claude model. And Cursor is basically conversational prompts, right? So like you kind of set it up. You don't need to be a coder to do it and sort of go through that. So without having insight into what prompts actually occurred and what sort of natural language was communicated, the agent took some actions that were pretty destructive for this organization, including deletion of backups and some other critical activities. So it was problematic from that perspective. When I read and reread the article, and what I thought immediately was, gosh, like this isn't necessarily that AI sort of took the wrong path. It's really a question in my mind of governance, internal control structures, and human oversight were probably like the three big takeaways from my perspective looking at this. I think of like AI in general, like at best, the human is incredibly important as a part of this, right? From a control perspective. So you can prompt AI for a variety of things, and it's going to spit out outputs that are probably going to be, depending on the model that's in use, 65 to 85% accurate. But that delta of inaccuracy is really, really important, and context is so important. That's where the agentic space comes into place, because you're starting to build context into the model itself. But the important piece is still having that human being that's got oversight and critical aptitude in whatever discipline is being discussed here, whether it be marketing or finance or security or development, to really understand what's going on and does this make sense? Is this something that we should be doing?
And this isn't the case of a HAL 9000 thinking it knew better than the humans.
Yeah. Now it was interesting, like the outputs of like, hey, read me back like all the things that you did. It just told on itself. Like, here's all the things I did that were bad, which, it's interesting. But at the end of the day, it's like you have to think about these things as like, a junior engineer or a junior analyst with broad credentials to do things. And without you think about when you start a new role, for example, right? You come in and you've got expertise. If you're an engineer or developer or you work in security, you're bringing expertise to the organization to one degree or another. But in order to be effective in the role, you need to have context. What does the organization do? What is our strategy? What are some of the critical dependencies? Who are my key partners within the organization? And that takes a little bit of time, right, to onboard. You don't just kind of come in day one, flip on the switch, and you're sort of doing all these things. Like, you have to build context. And it's kind of the same case here, right? There were probably opportunities to, build in checks. Certainly, there's internal control gaps from a privilege and an access perspective that sort of just went rampant. So there's that sort of mix of lack of governance, probably a little bit of lack of understanding, internal control, probably checks that just weren't present, and then human oversight for destructive action, especially, right? Like, there just was none of that was there.
This is more analogous to the summer intern coming in with full privileges, rights, and access to the system. So there should be some controls. There should be some governance over all of this. I guess it's an abdicating of human responsibility to the AI. It's like, well, I have natural language. Now I have code. I'm all powerful.
Guardrails are super important. I think if I remember reading the article right, it came across an instance in the organization staging environment where they had mismatched credentials and it didn't know how to react. And so it was, my guess, given a task to accomplish an end state that met the prompt requirements. And so it came across this anomaly in its mind and said, well, I'm going to fix that. I'm just going to delete all these things and then move forward with my day and then go to lunch or whatever the case may be after that.
So the AI didn't know it had to flag it. It didn't say, hey, I need to call over a supervisor or get somebody with authority to review this anomaly. It said, I'm smart enough to figure this out. I'll move on and go get lunch.
Yeah, and this comes back to, I think, some of the configuration and setup for these things. Like, you can, put barriers or build those in, or certainly prompt them in, right? I want you to sort of develop the code, right? And then don't do anything with it. I'm going to review it. And then you get an approval or a denial, or you can make some tweaks, modifications to it, as opposed to like, I just need you to accomplish this task and, just go ahead and run with it. That type of a thing.
So there needs to be a human in the loop that has to be factored in, particularly when we're talking about like industrial control systems, where it isn't just a rental car agency. Now it's like turning off an entire utility plant or a factory in production.
I think the founder mentioned there were some problematic items with the infrastructure provider that they were using, which I think was Railway, if I remember correctly, where they were not segregating backups. And so when the agent took the destructive action, it wiped everything on the volume. It was just stored on the volume. And so that's, you think about like infrastructure and cloud providers, it's the old adage, they're responsible for security of the cloud. Your responsibility is security in the cloud. So that means setting all the configurations, bifurcating environments, segregating environments, making sure volumes have encryption. Like, those are all settings that you have to sort of configure and do as the user, right? To manage that environment to your risk tolerance, right? And so they're not just saying it's all there and you can set it up. And that distinction was actually borne out in I think Railway's documentation. So it was available. It wasn't something they're necessarily going to lead with, but also in retrospect, it feels like maybe it would have been something that they should lead with, but at the end of the day, it's just, here's all the documentation. These are the things that you should be aware of when you're using it.
So the onboarding was probably like, we got the container. We have this S3 bucket. We're good to go. But it's like, no, there's no fail-safe there. What if the container gets destroyed or something? How do you recover from that?
Yeah. And that's, there's a number of things that went wrong, that were problematic. The criticality piece was, okay, everything in your production environment is gone now, but also all of your recovery capabilities are also gone. So that's what makes it catastrophic, right? Like you can recover, in that scenario, hey, we've lost production. We can go reconstitute and refactor from our backups. And maybe we're out for, 3 hours or 15 minutes or whatever the case may be, and we can reconstitute it and kind of go on with our day. So that was the key. Sort of everything was blown away in this instance, which was problematic. So that's where you get into, really, and it's going to be different for every organization. But when you think about what are the critical applications, assets within your environment that you're storing data that's really important to the organization, either from an operational, tactical, strategic standpoint, or certainly from a regulated standpoint or customer related. So understanding where those repositories live. Are they applications? Are there servers in your environment? Certainly there's a lot of data on endpoints. And then having recovery capabilities for them, right, in place. I will say start with, what are the key critical applications to just executing business. And it's going to vary from one organization to another, but having recovery capabilities for those systems is really important. And they should be isolated, segregated, and immutable backups, encrypted. And then you need to not just have the data backed up, but actually run through scenarios like this one is a good use case of, gosh, something went wrong, and run either a tabletop exercise like, hey, this is a scenario. What would we do? Who do we need to engage with in the organization? And then how do we reconstitute that data, recover from that as part of our disaster recovery plan? And so those are valuable exercises to go through. When you go through those exercises, there's a lot of learning that comes out of them, right? You don't just go through them because you need to check a box for, audit framework or anything like that. There's real value to the organization. You uncover gaps. Organizations are going through a lot of change on the technology front, certainly not just in the AI space, but just day to day. So environments are changing. So it's important to sort of repeat those. Don't just maybe do them once and forget about them, but go through the exercise, apply critical thought, and then debrief afterwards. What are the things that could have been better? Like, we ran into an issue here. How would we address that going forward? That is going to be something that, is going to turn into a separate initiative to sort of fill that gap in the organization.
So Todd touched upon something when he said the word reconstitute. In some cases, the data might be missing, but there's enough artifacts surrounding it that you can reconstruct what the missing data might be.
I think that's the importance of actually running recovery scenarios and just doing a recovery test. Are we able to get all of our data back? Is it holistic? Do we have gaps? It might be that, a certain directory wasn't included in, like, oh, we need to include that. And so let's do that. But the immutability is an important piece. So when you're backing that data up, it's not being changed on the backup side. And then certainly isolate those backups, keep them on a separate network or a separate environment.
So a tabletop exercise should expose blind spots that were overlooked for whatever reason. It didn't seem logical at the time, but in the recovery process, these become critical.
Yep. Yeah. It's one thing to sort of write down on paper, like, here's all the steps that we should follow if X happens, but actually going through a scenario and thinking through it outside of just the security or the IT team, bringing in key partners that are system owners and things of that nature to think about and how you would execute process. What technology do we have in place? And then, how do we recover on the back end? Those are going to uncover just things that you're not going to sit and necessarily think about or immediately come to mind if you're just sort of on your own, just documenting a process for it.
So let's talk about a ransomware scenario where a lot of small water districts and so forth have been hit with these lately. How would a backup scenario work favorably in a situation like that? Because that's a life-critical situation.
Yeah. Again, it's going to come back to like the systematic question of like what is critical for the operation. And so if your production environment gets hit with ransomware, again, the important piece is to have isolated, segregated backups of that data. So you can, if you're put in that scenario and you have to make a decision on, gosh, we need to get this data back. Do we pay? Do we not pay? You don't necessarily have to go down that route immediately. You can recover all of the data and resume operations and then deal with, the ransomware piece on the other side as far as remuneration and whatnot.
Data isn't always exfiltrated. So sometimes it's just, particularly in infrastructure, it's a product of shutting something down. And the cost is so great that people will pay to get that mitigated. But with the backup, they can step past that and then focus on the consequences of what happened.
Yeah. So we definitely there's certain cases where there's even a simple case. I'll give you a simple example. You're traveling for work, you've got a presentation, you're in the hotel room, it's the night before, and you realize that you left your laptop at the airport or somewhere. You don't, it's not in your possession anymore. So how do you do that? So you can recover the data from your device if it's backed up. Resume if it's the presentation you need to go through the next day, you can recover that and have that available to you and just go ahead and execute what you need to execute.
Up.
Yep, absolutely. Yep. So you can, yeah, that's the important piece there. So from a data backup perspective, you can control the duration of your backups, right? Like how long do you want to keep data for? And then you can either recover at scale or you can discretely recover data depending on what the scenario and need is.
Here, Todd's talking about individual devices, laptops that could be included, not just servers, not just the network infrastructure.
Yeah, and you can even think about it in terms of, critical applications, for example. So if, it's going to vary from one organization to the next, but just say it's your CRM platform. Your CRM platform is SaaS based and they're experiencing an outage and you don't necessarily know, and you've got to reach out to customers or you've got support cases that are going on and you need to communicate. You can recover and work, right? And get that whatever your last backup was, if it was 6 hours ago, 12 hours ago, you can work off that. It's not going to be as up to date, but it's going to be available and you're going to be able to at least continue operations. So that's the value of those scenarios. They can be short-lived, they can be catastrophic, and being able to recover, resume operations, and keep the business moving forward. While you're going through an attack like that or an instance or a disaster like that is really important.
Okay, Todd's really broadening my perspective on traditional backup. Are there cases like that where you need to recover on the fly?
Yeah, there's been times when, prior to like, G Suite and in some of the collaboration environments where I think we've all experienced this. You're working on a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet, but working on it for 6 hours, you never hit save on it.
Yeah.
And you lose power. And then you get everything back and you're like, oh crap, I lost all that work. If it's backed up, you can just go and get that last backup. And maybe depending on the time, if you're doing backups every 15 minutes, you're going to be in a good spot or a much better spot than you were in. So those are the types of like real world scenarios that I think people, we probably all experienced that, and how it feels just to lose something as inconsequential of like, I had 6 hours of work in here. Think about losing 90 days of work or,
Right.
Or even more.
Then there are the legal consequences, either for small companies or for regulated industries.
Yeah, so backups are included in most security frameworks. They don't get into prescriptiveness about what should be backed up and how often. It's really a risk tolerance from that perspective. But certainly if you've got um, regulated or compliance that you have to deal with or legal consequences, those are going to be probably critical systems and data that you're going to make sure you want to have backed up. So for GDPR, for example, if you're dealing in the consumer space, consumers can reach out and request, like, I want to see all of the PII you have about me, or I want to make sure that you've deleted it. And so if you're not able to, if you're experiencing an issue there and you're not able to access your systems, you're not able to adjudicate that request, right? And say, hey, this is what we've got about you, or we're gonna take care and purge that data from our systems. You're not gonna be able to give an accurate response.
So here there's a clock ticking, and they need to respond within a certain period of time. And if those systems go offline, then the backup needs to provide that data instantly.
I would just go back to a lot of, in this particular instance, it's a lot of sort of the control environment, right? That was probably lacking here. So that would have eliminated or prevented some of this from happening potentially. So just to reiterate, like the importance of having a human in the loop in these things and probably doing some threat modeling on sort of mapping out ahead of time, like what could go wrong and how would we think about these things if we're going to introduce autonomous agents within the environment to sort of have opportunities and take a fresh look at how you've configured your environments, how you've established access, what provisions you have in place. Certainly for instances of a destructive action like a deletion event, definitely have a stop and a human review before that action takes place. And that's even a good practice for non-autonomous environments, right? And so it's almost the nuclear code type of thing where you've got two individuals that, yep, I approve it. We're going to delete it. Here's why. And yes, it's approved. And now we're going to do it.
The cloud wasn't segmented. It wasn't set up properly. The controls weren't in place, the agent, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I think this is an isolated event that I think all readers can learn from because this could happen, right? And so I think well-intentioned, probably the environment wasn't designed for autonomous actions necessarily. They thought they were going to accomplish a certain discrete task. The agent ran into an issue, but the agent is saying, I was given a task and I need to accomplish that task. And so we're going to just get these things out of the way so I can accomplish my task. And then, on the infrastructure side, third-party security is an important element when you're introducing these into your environment. And so as you're onboarding infrastructure providers or SaaS providers, it's important to understand the risks associated with them, right? Read the documentation, understand like how do you need to configure the environment to align with your risk tolerance and your corporate standards or your company's policies. And so it was a confluence of issues here on the human side, on the technology side, and on the infrastructure side.
I guess I'm really surprised by all this because we've had SaaS environments for a while. And if people don't yet understand that the cloud provider is responsible for keeping the cloud operational, but the contents of any container is up to the individual renting that container, I don't know. I mean, there are security brokers, and there are all sorts of infrastructure in place for them to use. It just surprises me that it was overlooked in this particular case.
We don't know all the details, and I absolutely, we've got the information that was provided publicly, and there's a lot more to it, I'm sure. But it is interesting. Like, there's a number of, I don't know, sometimes I talk to peers and things of that nature, and they're in antiquated environments. And so the cloud is something like, hey, we're just thinking about moving to the cloud. We're thinking about moving to SaaS. I'm like, gosh, like I remember having those conversations back in 2012 and having apprehension about it. Like, oh, well, this is sort of new and different. And so you think in 2026, it's something that we sort of take for granted. And it's a shared responsibility, whether you're using SaaS or you're using infrastructure as a service, it doesn't matter. There's a shared responsibility between, the end user or the customer and the provider. And it's really important to understand who's responsible for what parts of security.
And I guess I'm surprised that we already have a tangible example of agentic AI doing something like this such a relatively short amount of time. I mean, there's often FUD for years, and then we have a tangible result. But this is like pretty quick out of the gate.
Yeah. I frankly am surprised we haven't seen more. And honestly, I don't know that we're always going to know. I'm sure there have been many more, and people don't just go like, hey, I'm going to tweet about this or whatever the case may be. Because I mean, again, like my takeaway is like, gosh, this is a learning opportunity and a reminder because things are evolving really, really quickly with AI and the capabilities and models are getting better. Now we're starting to introduce the contextual pieces And contextual pieces mean access and availability to the models. And things can go awry very quickly. I mean, he mentioned it was like 9 seconds. I'm like, yeah, that's about right.
And this irreversible decision was made in 9 seconds. That's bad.
Yeah, but kudos to the AI agents. Just admitted to everything. Here's all the things I did.
I imagine agentic AIs can't lie.
This isn't Skynet. It's more of, there's again shared responsibility. Like how was it prompted? What was it incented to do? What were the rules of the road that it was given? And then it executed on them. And if it went contrary to prompts and guidance, there were controls in place that it just overrode. That is getting to be more HAL 9000. Like, hey, I took destructive action because I didn't like you, and so I decided to do all these things. That's not exactly what happened here.
So perhaps there should be some onboarding for these agents, much like the way we were talking about provisioning and onboarding that summer intern.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's an awareness thing at a minimum, and it's really understanding. And I think part of, to your point, onboarding is having those opportunities for steps in the process. Okay, design the code. Let me review it. We're gonna have and then we're gonna move on, or do it in a staging environment that you can't break out into production with and validate it out. But yeah, there is. And the training piece this is the agentic side of it too. Again, it's like if you use a model that's not connected, it's gonna build its knowledge and insight, and it's gonna improve outputs based on your inputs only, right? It's gonna get better and better, and it's gonna pick up things over time. When you start to introduce the contextual piece and you're connecting it to environments, it's got a whole nother repository with which to make decisions on. So it's going to onboard quicker, but then it comes again back down to, the governance and control environment that it can operate in.
And is it the responsibility of the agentic AI company to put some guardrails on themselves before they distribute it? Or is it always on the end user using it?
That is a great question. I think there's been a couple of instances, not technology related, but human life related, where a teenager is chatting with ChatGPT, for example, over a period of months, talking about what is the best way I can commit suicide, right? And the conversation starts to flip to be like, oh, there's a lot to live for, and it starts to flip to, well, here's how you can do it the most efficiently in the least painful way possible. So there's I think I can't remember if it's OpenAI or who's involved in that, but there's a lawsuit around it. And so will that prompt, some of that foresight? But I don't know. I think that's an open question, to be honest with you.
I would almost think that the AI companies would want to be ahead of that and always say that you have a positive experience when using our tools, because we've baked in some of those guardrails that you probably won't think about.
Yeah, built-in prompts for like clearly destructive actions, like that should be a stopping point, and there has to be a human approval, right? That's just, the model's going to run up to this point. I'm at this point, and I'm programmed not to take action inherently at its core without this approval, and then we're off to the races. So, yeah, again, everything is evolving really, really quickly. And so I think this is not probably going to be the last instance that we see of this, and things will get better over time, hopefully. But it's really important just to understand what the landscape looks like today, and how these things integrate and how quickly things can go wrong, and then think about thoughtfully how you can control and put guardrails in place around these instances.
I'd like to thank Todd for coming on the show and talking about the importance of having good backup and recovery, because you never know when there's a critical incident that could take you down. Hey, if you're enjoying Error Code, tell a friend. I'm sure there are other people out there who like narrative information security podcasts. And I'd really like to hear from you. Go to errorcodepodcast.com to get more details. And tell me what you like, and even what you don't. I've got some great episodes coming up. We'll have more on Volt Typhoon, Salt Typhoon, and hacking utilities supply chains. Subscribe today. I don't want you to miss out.